Calendars. Calendars are the way that we make meaning out of our days. The whole world joined the Western Gregorian calendar in celebrating New Year's Day on January 1st. Last weekend started the Lunar New Year with celebrations in Asian communities following a different and much more ancient calendar. And then here in the church, Mardi Gras ended this week with Fat Tuesday, followed by Ash Wednesday, when we shared ashes as a reminder of the gift that life is, no matter the number of our days. So today, we are beginning the season of Lent. The tradition of Lent goes back to the first centuries of the church, a time when the church would baptize new Christians on Easter Sunday, and it was big. And the 40 days leading up to that celebration was a time of self-reflection, of studying Scripture, of preparing for the changes that this commitment was going to bring in their lives. Because for the earliest church, choosing to follow Jesus would drastically change your life. Your family might disown you, your country might call you a traitor, and if you were in the military, you would have to find other work because the first Christians were pacifists. You would need to think long and hard about this commitment you were making. Now, in case any of you like adding up numbers in your head, then you might recognize that the season of Lent actually begins 46 days before Easter. But that is because every Sunday is seen as a celebration of the resurrection. So that's not to be a day of fasting or mourning. So the Sundays are not included in the 40 days of Lent. And then gradually, over the centuries, Lent became a time of fasting from food or some particular foods, or for something that might be getting in the way of one's relationship with God. So during Lent, we choose something. We choose to let go of something that we realize might be hindering our spiritual growth. We might see it as a time of physical and spiritual house cleaning. So during the season of Lent here in worship, we follow Jesus on the way to the cross. And this year, we're going to walk that path with the apostle Simon Peter. Because in Peter, we see a person who is both determined and unsure. He's one minute a bold leader and next a very confused follower. Then he's a dedicated friend, and the next time we see him, he's a frightened betrayer. So in these experiences in Peter's life, we also see ourselves. By following Peter's journey, we watch the story of Jesus unfolding through the eyes of a very normal human being, just trying to figure it all out, just like us. So today we begin at the beginning of Peter's relationship with Jesus, and it's a story about fishing. We're told that Jesus needed a little break from the crowds that had started to follow him, so he stepped onto a docked boat nearby, and he asked Simon Peter, the owner of this boat, if he could talk to the crowd, but, backing off with a little distance between them. And then he told Peter to take them out fishing. He told an experienced fisherman to put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch. And Simon Peter's exasperation was understandable because he responded, seriously, we've already been out all night and we have caught nothing. This just isn't a fishing kind of day. But then again, maybe he's thinking this is the new Rabbi Jesus and everybody seems to be impressed with him and he's been out here talking to the regular folks, so okay. I'll go out. I'll let down some nets. And when he did, they caught so many fish that their nets were about to break, and they signaled to their partners in the other boats to come out and help them, and they filled their boats until they were about to sink. They were so full, and they were shocked, and they were amazed, and a little bit afraid. And here we see Jesus saying something he ends up saying a lot of times over and over. You don't need to be afraid. And he suggests to Simon Peter that his life is about to change. From now on, you'll be catching people. And then they brought the boats ashore, and they left everything to follow him. Now, we tend to take this fish story and many others at face value, and we just assume that this net full of fish, that's the miracle of the story. But really, it is leading to something that is so much greater, which it's always like that with Jesus. The fish story is really about Simon, and it's about us, and it's about leading us out of fear, out of our isolation and our loneliness, into the deep waters of God's love. Jesus told Simon to leave the shallow water and go into the deep. And everyone knows that's where the fish are, in the deep water. You go where the fish are. But sailing out into the deep water takes faith. Venturing over deep water is risky. You don't know what's down there. You don't know how quickly the weather could change. You don't know if the boat is going to hold, if the waves pick up. Anybody seen that movie, The Perfect Storm? No, thank you. Don't want the deep. I went deep sea fishing, but it was really deep, the Gulf of Mexico fishing, and there were no big storms coming up. Staying in the shallow water, it's such a temptation. The shallow water is safe. We are comfortable there. We can see whatever is coming near our feet. Doesn't take a whole lot of courage to wade out into the shallow waters. And yet Jesus is always inviting people into the deeper end of things. And of course, Jesus is not talking about water here. He said to Simon, with his friends all listening, "Don't be afraid, now you will be catching people." There's the catch to our fish story. It isn't catching fish. It's all about people. And it's not catching people with a net. It is about loving people into community. It's about building relationships. And that's a lot more frightening than fishing. Because loving people is dangerous. Loving people requires that we leave our comfort zone and we drop our emotional safety nets and we go deep. And you can get hurt. And people can betray you. And people will disappoint you. And they might leave you. And who wants to be that vulnerable? Nobody wants to. But we all need to. To be vulnerable enough to connect with others. Because that's what we were made for. And that's what the church was meant for. This is what is really at the core of faith. It's opening ourselves to a relationship with God, our Creator, which will inevitably lead us into deeper relationships with one another, taking on that messy matter of love. Catherine Matthews reminds us that there are countless thousands now who have left their childhood faith, not because of intellectual doubts, because they just weren't loved there. Perhaps they felt judged or excluded or insulted. Perhaps their gifts were not recognized and they felt misunderstood. But our churches are meant to be the beginning places of love. And the love that we have to offer needs to be a gift that is healing, that is hopeful, that is a promise of what could be in anyone's lives. So how do we become that? How do we overcome our fears? How do we go deep? Because we are set in our ways as humans. Our fears are very deeply entrenched. Our habits feel like they are set in stone. We don't even know how to begin. The good news is, even though we have been molded by our early experiences, our bodies, our brains, our minds, and our hearts do continue to change and can be changed by our ongoing experiences and by the people that we interact with. In their book, A General Theory of Love, a book I find fascinating, there's 3 doctors, Lewis, Amini, and Lannon, and they describe our situation as humans saying love, or the lack of it, changes the brain. Love is and always will be the best insurance against despair, the despair for which drugs seem to be the obvious antidote. But in this, medicine has lost sight of the truth. Good physicians have always known that relationships heal. Our nervous system was once thought to unfold according with the instructions of its DNA, and now we begin to understand that our nervous system needs exposure to critical experiences that will drive healthy growth throughout our lives. Everything a person is and everything one knows resides in this interweaving of neurons that spring from your DNA in your daily life, your genes, and your experiences of love. So we come together as the church because we have experienced the unconditional, affirming, and forgiving love that comes from God, our one true parent. But the change in our hearts and our minds, the changing in the patterns of our brains, well, that takes time. That takes ongoing relationships to fully experience and express this kind of love, which means that we need each other. We need this ongoing experience of being in truly loving relationships, loving others, being loved. And this love is not just a feeling, but it is expressed in our actions, in the way that we interact with one another. Which is why Paul wrote to the earliest church in Corinth, love is not envious or boastful, not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. Because now we begin to see and understand that when we interact with people who are resentful and irritable, people who treat us with rudeness over and over again, those patterns get embedded into our brains, and we are changed by it, not for the better. But if we get to relate each day, each week, throughout the year with people who rejoice with us, who respect our needs and our values and our opinions, then what happens is that positive pattern is embedded into our brains and our lives. And not only that, our blood pressure is lowered and our stress hormones are lowered and our immune system is strengthened, so we become physically and spiritually healthier and happier people. And all this tells us that you have the ability to change another person's brain and their life just by the way that you interact with them, just by the way you speak, the way you look at them, the way you listen to them. And your life, your brain, is changed by the people you choose to spend your time with in this life. So he might not have had the scientific studies to prove it, but this is what Jesus had in mind for Simon Peter and for all those who would follow him. Changing people's lives through the experience of being loved unconditionally. So, this story is about catching people, not with a net, and not even with evangelizing with any form of threat or coercion. It's about loving people into relationship and into community, and that's more difficult. And our fishing story here is a dramatic turning point in the life of Simon Peter, because after this experience, this encounter, he will leave his home and his business and his way of life to follow Jesus. But there will still be ups and downs, much like the rest of us. So for us today, as we begin this season of Lent, we begin with this intention of making space in our lives for God, recognizing that we are on a journey of faith, like Peter. We find ourselves stepping up and sometimes retreating, making commitments and sometimes falling short, and starting over again and again. Diana Butler Bass reminds us that our faith is about love and sacrifice and enacting an alternative way of life over against the powers of this world. But in order to enact that in public, we need to practice in private. So maybe we could think of Lent as a season of practice. This year, maybe practice giving up something that is getting in your way, or practice something you want more of in your life. So sing, practice forgiving, do justice, love your enemies, practice keeping Sabbath, or offering hospitality, or serving the poor, caring for the planet. The more that we practice this faith, the more we become the person that God, our Creator, intended us to be, generous and wise and grounded in what is beautiful and just. This is what we will see in the life of Simon Peter as gradually his faith deepens. He understands more, like us, growing in faith and life. So as you begin this season of Lent, prayerfully consider what practice of letting go or starting anew might help your life. Something that will draw you into the awareness of God and into this ongoing call to go deeper into the life of love. We will practice Lent together, but now together let's sing.